What is your best one time my dad story? One time, when I was about 10, my dad called me into his room. He and my mom were there, completely naked, standing around and laying their clothes down ready to get dressed. They acted like the situation was completely normal and asked me about some random thing. I eventually blocked this memory out and thought it to be a dream, but then, 10 years later, they told me that was their way of showing me what a body looked like, because I was getting close to that age. Dude. What the duck? TLDR, my parents flashed me to avoid the talk. I can't argue with their logic, but I question their methods. One time my dad saw I was in a really low mood, so he walked into my room, grabbed my trash hat Maku wig and my swim goggles, put them both on and followed me around for a solid 10 minutes, completely nonchalant, to make me laugh. Imagine, if you will, a large imposing black man, wearing a teal pigtailed wig and goggles so old they're turning brown, casually making himself a sandwich. Edit, what the duck? One time my dad's fart smelled so bad my dog threw up. My dad crop dusted an old woman in IKEA and she looked like she was having flashbacks to World War II. I had an internship at an elementary school and once I farted directly in this first grader's face. Didn't know the little ducker was behind me, and I swear to God he ate it. Turned around and all he said was, "Mr. Russell, that wasn't very nice." One time when I was 6 I got my big toenail ripped off. And my dad convinced me to put the toenail under my pillow for the toenail fairy. I got $1. One time my dad ripped a humongous fart and killed all the power in the neighborhood. Literally. Peep. Dark. Spoiler, we later found out that someone had hit a pole further up the line at that exact moment. It made perfect sense to us kids. Dad's an electrician and has deadly farts. Peep. Dark. Now I use this as an example that correlation is not causation. One time my dad scared the piss out of a guy that wouldn't take no for an answer. I got pretty much peer pressured onto going on a double date with a guy I hated, and I had told him I hated him. We both worked at the local fast food joint. I was fresh out of high school and naive and felt like I had to be nice. He asked me out in a way that put me on the spot too. On his day off in the middle of my shift he showed up dressed like he was going to a wedding, brought me a bunch of flowers and asked me in the middle of a lunch rush, mortifying me, and everyone started chanting, "Say yes." I agreed and ran out on my shift crying and feeling like I couldn't back out. It was painfully obvious during and after the date I was not interested. He kept calling me, texting me, leaving me threatening and weird voicemails. He even drove by my house a few times. My parents, noticing my change in mood, asked me what was up, and I told them and played them the voicemails. My dad asked me when we next had the same shift. I told him. My dad came to the restaurant after his factory shift. My dad is a big dude and looks scary, especially covered in grease and wearing a uniform. My dad busts into the restaurant, gives me a hug, asks me, "Where is the son of the bitch?" Everyone is frozen in place and slack-jawed. Anyone that knew my dad knew him as a goofy kind guy, so they were just in awe of this whirlwind that had bust in the door. I pointed to the kitchen, and this dopey mother ducker looks like he is going to piss his pants. My dad points right at him and says, "Leave my daughter the duck alone or I will go back to jail." Tells me he loves me and mom is cooking dinner. Waves to some of my friends he knows and walks out the door like nothing ever happens. That guy went on a break and never came back. And he never bothered me again. One time my dad made me drive 3 hours from home to visit a nature preserve. He then began taking pics of the birds there. Just one problem, the birds were plastic. Turns out the flocks had stopped migrating back to the preserve, so they put up plastic birds for tourists. The funniest part was how long it took him to listen to me telling him they were plastic. One time my dad waited till my 3 siblings and I had gone to bed on Christmas Eve. Then he shouted, "I don't care who you are, fat man. Get that sled off my roof." We were all up and telling dad not to yell at Santa. One time my dad almost slit my throat because he thought I was a burglar. I had snuck downstairs for some reason, I was in the kitchen and heard him coming in, so I hid behind the kitchen counter. Heard my dad opening drawers and things. Next thing I know, he had leaned over the counter and grabbed my head, had a kitchen knife to my throat. A split second later he realized it was me and dropped me. Then I got yelled at because he had heard me breathing, thought I was a home intruder, and I almost got in a world of pain. He was shaking from adrenaline. As a dad now myself, I can imagine the state of mind he was in. One time my dad took my brother's walkie-talkie and had us and about 10 kids in the neighborhood convinced that we had picked up a signal from a plane that was crashing towards the earth. We were running up and down the streets for an hour with our eyes on the sky, listening as the pilot tried to reach someone for help. Dad's windows were open, so we eventually caught on to the heinous laughter echoing between the houses after every Mayday. According to my grandmother, my dad, on his first day of school back in the 60s, came home all smiles and laughter. The next day when my grandmother awoke him for his second day of school, he matter-of-factly replied, "No, I've already been to school." He really thought school was something like the dentist or inoculations where you only have to go the once and that's it. Lol. That was a long 12 years for him. One time, my older brother and I were helping my dad cut down some trees in the backyard and the chainsaw kind of stuck, and my dad yanked it out a little too hard and hit my brother's leg. We all froze and looked at his jeans, which had 4 or so perfectly spaced holes, but no blood. He had managed to hit my brother's pants, but didn't get in far enough to hit flesh. The next words out of his mouth were pretty obvious. "Don't tell your mother." And we still haven't 20+ years later. One time my dad literally took candy from a baby. A 2-year-old held up a lollipop and my dad assumed the kid was giving it to him. After taking it and walking away, he realized the toddler probably just wanted to show it to him. One time my dad came home after I had a party at the house. There were girls dancing together on the pool table, and one of them had Cheeto dust on their fingers. I tried to clean it, but couldn't get all of it before they got home. He calls me downstairs and asks about the marks on the table. I couldn't think of a lie, so I just told him the truth. He stares for a couple seconds and then says, "Nice." So we were having a family dinner over the summer, and my sister had been at a barbecue the day before and the host gave her a big bowl of fruit salad to take home. We're sitting there having dinner and my dad is staring at the fruit salad with this weird look on his face, and he says, "What are these little blue things?" while holding up a blueberry. We were like, "How the duck do you not know what a blueberry is?" Then realized my mom hates blueberries, so dude hasn't seen a blueberry in 45 years and forgot they existed. What is a potato? One time my dad took me to my college orientation back in '98. I grew up in an urban setting and wanted to mix it up, so I decided on an undergrad school in a very rural area. Read, not a lot of diversity. My dad is the best and always wants to goof around. We had this Jeep growing up that we called Little Blackie because it was little and black. A running joke was that anytime any of us in the family saw a similar looking Jeep, one of us would yell, "Hey, look, it's Little Blackie." Bet you see where this is going. We are walking around campus and sure enough, there was a Jeep parked within sight. My dad starts yelling, "Hey, look, Little Blackie, Little Blackie." Of course the only African American kid on campus was walking right in front of us. My dad was oblivious and kept right on yelling. The poor kid looked at me in disgust and I was so very mortified. I wanted to disappear. I ended up becoming really good friends with him later in my freshman year, and after I explained the whole story he laughed super hard. Thank goodness. I still cringe thinking about it though. One time my dad defended my honor in the form of a snowball fight massacre, which I didn't learn about until nearly a decade later. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, walking home from my friend's house after enjoying a snow day sledding around in her hilly backyard. Apparently the neighborhood boys around my age, I'm a girl, spent their day building a fort structure. I remember stopping briefly to admire it, but no kids in sight. Oh well, I turn and continue walking home. Suddenly about 5 boys popped out the back of the fort and pummeled the shit out of me with snowballs. I guess they also spent the day stocking ammunition and awaiting the perfect passing victim. They really ducked my shit up. I am a stupidly petite adult and thusly was a really tiny little girl, and these dumb boys really didn't understand that they were going too far. I was down on the ground and still getting nailed snowball after snowball, mostly in the head face area. After the initial shock, I made efforts to block the shots with my snow saucer and finally got on my feet to run. They followed me until they ran out of projectiles and retreated. Relieved, I stopped running and was just so upset, I was barely even walking. Just dragging my feet, crying, trying to wipe my face with big stupid bulky gloves. Then my dad's car pulls up next to me. He had gone to work that day despite the snow, and had just pulled into the neighborhood. "Hey kid, need a ride?" So yeah, I get in the car and he sees I've been crying. At first I wouldn't tell him why I was upset, because I was embarrassed and didn't want to be a tattletale. Once we pulled into the driveway though, he wouldn't let me out of the car until I told him what was up. After my explanation he told me to go inside and get washed up for dinner, that he'll be inside in a few minutes. Okay, so time warp to 10 years later. I was planning a big high school graduation cookout at our house, and I was inviting all the kids from the neighborhood. A couple of those boys from the snowball incident told me they didn't really feel comfortable hanging out at my parents' house, to which I'm like, the duck are you talking about? These boys then lay out this tale. On that fateful snowy day, my dad drove back to the kids' fort and screamed at all of them to come out or he would call their parents. Once all the boys were lined up, Dad, still in his suit and tie, demolished their fort. Kicked the shit all down. Then from the rubble he made big ass man-sized snowballs, and made sure each kid got a violent face full of their precious fort. Duck yeah, Dad. One time, my dad was sitting on the couch in our living room. Mom brought out a bag of sugar and asked him to open it. He opened it like it was a bag of Doritos, and I mean, it was everywhere. He was only wearing his shorts, so there was sugar in just about every square inch of his visible hair, as well as all over our couch and carpet. Took him 4 showers in a row to get it all off. And that's where sugar daddies come from. This was a few years back, but my dad really got into my pot brownies. Only way I know this is because I woke up in the middle of the night to him putting baby socks on my dog. His only statement was, "Dogs shouldn't have cold feet."